Hello, ladies and gentlemen, fine, sexy people of the internet. It is Brian or Jetta here with Mana Beast, and today I wanted to do a little overview about the newly released CRD for the Dragon Ball Z card game, which, well, I'll get you my overall review later. Let's just get right into it, what the changes are and how it's going to affect the game in general. So, starting off with, they have now limited Black Smoothness Drill to 1 copy per deck. Was this needed? I would say yes, it was very much needed. It was a card that you would regularly see ran at 2 or 3 of in decks, especially in black camping decks such as Black Promo Krillin or other decks that wanted to stay on 1. The main reason I think it's positive bringing it to 1 is because running it at 3 really brought no detriment to your deck, because as it goes, putting it down first turn was amazing. And I don't know how many times, I don't know how many times I play against the Black Krillin player and it'd be like, oh, draw 3 first turn, Black Smoothness Drill, pass, your turn. It would happen more often than not. And the other reason that a lot of players had no problem including it at 3 was because it has Endurance 2. So if you took it for damage, it soaked up 2 more cards of damage. And a lot of times the players didn't care. It was just having it at 3 so you could consistently get it as quickly as possible, allowing you to have 5 cards in your hand, which of course, with the Black Devious Mastery, gives you card advantage. So when you ditch that non-useful card and you get down to 4 cards, your opponent's down to 3. And it also just allows you to keep the pressure on with more attacks, have more guards. So while I think the card is good, and I don't think it's necessarily broken, I think the ability to run it at 3 is what made it a little bit unbalanced, including the Endurance 2. So limit 1 per deck I do think is a solid change, and I think it will help to curb some of the Black Promo Krillin players. They'll have to play a little differently. They won't always be able to as consistently depend on those 5 card or extra card hands when they're going into combat. So I think it's a positive change. Another change that happened was Namekian Flinch. You are now going to place the ball instead of play it if you were at level 3 and above. Again, I do think this is a necessary change. Why? Well, because it used to be in Namekian decks, getting to level 3 was a little more difficult. Now, of course, we did have Leaping Kick introduced even before Cell was around. We did have, in the Namekian Mastery, you could easily get to level 3. I'm not saying it was difficult, but it was a little bit harder to get to level 3 previously to changes in MPs and card pools that were made available to the Namekian Mastery. Getting to level 3, especially when we're talking about Cell, was completely too easy. And once you got to 2, you fished out the Leaping Kick, you got to 3, and then if I threw a physical at you, you got out a free Dragon Ball and were able to play it. And that's where a lot of times it was counterintuitive to how the game worked, because there are a lot of decks that are throwing out physicals. There are physical beat decks. There are decks that use physical attacks. Even decks like Blue that uses a card like Blue Betrayal. I can't tell you the number of times I would be going up against a Namekian deck and they'd be at level 3 and I'm going, I don't really want to throw this Blue Betrayal. I mean, I want to banish this thing. I want to get rid of this. But a lot of times you would either know by either, depending on if they were playing, let's just say Restored, they could kind of telegraph their moves and you would know they'd have a flinch in hand. Playing that, you know, Blue Betrayal to get rid of a setup drill or ally was good, but the advantage they would then get off of it from flinch, being able to play the exact right ball, the exact right time, was a little too much momentum in my opinion. And the play mechanic versus the place, I think, is where a lot of players disagreed with how flinch worked and its power within the game. Now I think it functions a lot more like Kami. Kami is placing a play, you're not playing it, which again, I think still allows Dragon Ball Victory decks to be played. It still allows you to use effects within the Namekian that lets you proc using your Dragon Balls or use effects. So if you wanted to use something like Targeted Strike, you can still use the effects of it. With the ball you placed onto the field from flinch, you just can't play it. So again, I think a very much needed change on Namekian Flinch. Next change, and one of the ones that everybody has been talking about, Cell has been, in my opinion, one of the most overpowered MPs in the game. I think he has, with as diverse as the meta has been, and I agree, we have a very diverse meta, I still think he has been very overpowering within the game. He has really been the top meta deck to go against, especially with his mechanic of bouncing from level 3 to level 4 and then back down again and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. This really neutered a lot of decks. This neutered MPPV decks. This neutered decks that wanted to use blue dominance and stay at 2. And this even neutered decks that needed to get to levels 2 or 3. They might not necessarily want to MPPV, but again, it just kept lowering them down, back to 1, while your opponent is at 3 and 4, back and forth over and over again. So one of the other changes they've made is to Cell himself. Cell can only use his level 3 powers once per game. So he's only allowed to use the level 3 powers to level him up to level 4, which he then can level himself back down to level 3, but then at that point, he's stuck being there at level 3. So he can't go back up and do it again and go over and over and over again. He'll have to naturally anger back up to it. I think this is an amazing idea because it now changes the play style. It now forces Cell players to naturally, or through leaping kicks, or through other devices, get to level 4. They can level themselves back down. That's not an issue. They can level themselves back down, but they can only use that automatic level up ability once per game. So now they got to use it carefully. They can't just keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Because you just reach this point with a Cell game where it would go 3 to 4, 3 to 4. They go back and forth, banish your discard pile. They would tutor out a card beginning of combat. They'd lower back down and have a 7 life card unpreventable attack. I mean, it got insane because they could cherry pick the right card, then hit you with 7 life cards. It became out of control, in my opinion, and it brought those late games with Cell to almost an unplayable point. So again, the changes on Cell, I think, are perfect. Now, the last change that a lot of people have been talking about is the change to Overwhelming Power. This is the card that was used in a lot of the making Cells, especially Restored, which you revealed it, and when revealed, you were able to use an automatic crit effect. What this did with the Namekian Restored Mastery is allow them to do an infinite loop. Essentially, as long as you kept passing, or as long as you weren't in combat, or as long as even at the end of combat, you would have the opponent was able to reveal the card with the Restored Mastery, they would do an automatic crit effect. So Ally decks, Dragon Ball decks, and Anger decks, as fast and as aggressive as Cell was, overpowering allowed them to be not only quick, fast, and hit you for a lot of damage, but allowed them to play the slow game and allowed them to just crit outside of combat all the time. And I had never personally had a problem with the card. Like, going into tournaments, I'd never had a problem with the overpowering loop. It never came to a point where I felt like over and over again I was getting hit with crits and I was getting angered lower. I never got to that point in the game. However, I think it's a positive change to the meta because it punished decks that didn't want to go into combat. It punished the Roshi decks, red and black. It punished any kind of blue stall deck, whether it's a blue ball stall deck, whether it's a setup a drill deck with orange. It essentially said, look, if I got this card at the bottom of my deck, I can punish you over and over again for not going into combat. However, that's how some decks gain their advantage. They're a stall deck. They want to not go into combat. They want to put in setups and drills and balls and do effects. And Overwhelming Power said, look, we're not going to let you do that anymore. You can't do that. You're going to just keep getting critted over and over again. Your drills are going away, your allies are going away, and your anger's going away. This kind of change was made years ago with the change to the Namekian Mastery, the original Namekian Knowledge Mastery, when they didn't allow you to rejuve and gain anger outside of combat, because again, it promoted within the game an outside of combat effect that generated too much advantage for your opponent in an unfair way. And that's where I think this was needed. It's an absolute change that I think will help diversify the meta. It will help those slower stall decks to be able to build up the advantage they need since they don't go into combat all the time. There were players I talked to that said, well, if Overwhelming Power is at the bottom of the deck, then you just need to go into combat. Well, there are some times where for 2 to 3 turns you can't go into combat. If you are one of those defensive decks, if you are a Roshi deck, and your plan is to play setups and drills, you're not going to have that hand that allows you to do it, especially against the Cell deck when they're bouncing up between levels 4 and 3. That, to me, neutered those decks too much while giving a top tier deck like Cell too much advantage. So the neutering of overwhelming power, where essentially it just doesn't work with mastery effects. Non-mastery effects that reveal the card will allow you to activate the crit effects. However, effects through your mastery will not work whatsoever. Again, I think another positive change to the game. All in all, I think the CRD was great. I was very happy with what they did. I know there are a lot of people who are complaining about Cell. I wish I could feel pity for you. I wish I could feel sorry, but I don't, because Cell, with as diverse as the meta was, as I've said before, was still a very oppressive MP. And the way they built him, I don't think they foresaw fully the consequences of allowing him to bounce up and down, banishing cards, de-leveling, tutoring out of the deck, and doing a 7 life card unpreventable attack. I mean, just all that within the span of just one MP, I think was too powerful. The other changes I think are acceptable, and I think are going to open up the meta greater. So, all in all, positive change, Panini. One of the best CRDs they've released, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the meta will change into the end of set 5 and starting in with set 6. But of course, that's just my opinion. Let us know what you think. I mean, did you think the CRD changes was needed? What do you think about it? All the Cell players, you tell me your thoughts on what you think, or whether or not it should have been neutered, or whether or not it should have been changed. You know what? Hey, we're amicable to listening to any and all opinions. And of course, please rate, comment, and subscribe for more Dragon Ball Z card gaming goodness. And we'll see you all next time.